All right. So we are excited to be back. Hopefully everything is up and working, but we're excited to be back here with Mike Huguenor today. Mike Huguenor, musician and now author. And we're going to talk about both of those things. What we're here mostly to talk about is the release of your first book.
First published book.
First published book, yeah. Which we are very excited about. And the book is called Elvis is Dead, I'm Still Alive, The Story of Asian Man Records. We're definitely going to get into that because we're very excited about it. And I'm using we in the completely royal. I don't know why I'm saying we. It's just me. It's just me here. But let's start by learning a little bit about you, Mike. So, Mike, tell me kind of how did you get connected in? Obviously, you're a musician. How did you get connected in musically to the scene, to the world? Like, how did that start for you?
The general, punk and ska, all that whole world, you mean? Or Asian Man in particular?
Let's go two ways. Let's start out with how did you find the music to enjoy it? And then how did you start making the music? And tell me a little bit about that pathway.
Sure, yeah. Well, so I was a kid when Dookie came out. And that was on the radio at the same time as, Offspring's Smash, and shortly thereafter, Real Big Fish, and a lot of acts like that. And as I was starting, kind of the beginning of Third Wave, basically, it was kind of shortly on the tails thereafter. And as I was getting into that kind of stuff through the radio, naturally, and all my friends were a family member that I had never met before moved out to the West Coast, and just happened to be chatting. I was like 12 or something, 11 or 12 at the time, and was telling him that I liked this music, and some of it I had learned was called ska music, and I was just kind of becoming aware of it. And he goes, "Oh, cool, I'll make you a tape." And he made me a tape that had Operation Ivy on it, and Dead Kennedys, and a couple other bands. But basically, I heard those Operation Ivy songs, and I was like, well, I am not listening to anything else. This is basically it. And that got me really into kind of the general punk underground. You know, I was like, from Offspring, I learned about Nitro Records, and then from there learned about AFI and all those bands kind of. And AFI was active in the East Bay. I'm from the Bay Area. So I was kind of becoming aware of this whole No Use for a Name was also active during this time, and they were from San Jose as well. So there was kind of like this layer of sort of active punk occurring above me, basically. And then I also became aware at school through some friends of Asian Man. At that point was already kind of aware of the kind of music that Asian Man put out, but wasn't really fully aware of the record label itself yet. But became really familiar at that point. And, you know, I was already kind of playing in bands with friends in high school. Then right after high school, I started a band with a couple friends from around the area, one I went to high school with, and that was Shinobu. And so Shinobu started when I was like 19, pretty shortly out of high school. And we did a few tours and put out a record ourselves, and then had a friend put out a record. And it got the attention of Mike Park, and then he asked us to put out a record on Asian Man. And that's kind of how I got brought in to that world, basically, is through Shinobu. Bob had kind of become friends with him, Bob, our bass player. And then I got in.
So how old were you around that time when you were in, when Shinobu was making that connection?
Like maybe 20, 19, wow. 20, about there. It was, I think, because our record came out on Asian Man in 2006, and I would have been 22 at that point. So I think I probably ran into him when I was about 20. First kind of became aware of him, or first kind of became running into him around then. Probably the conversation about Shinobu doing something on Asian Man probably happened when I was about 21, and then it probably happened the year I turned 22. Probably I was 21 turning 22.
Okay. Now, you talked about something a minute ago there that I feel definitely connected to, and that is, you said kind of finding the Clash, or not, sorry, not the Clash, finding Offspring made you kind of follow Nitro Records, and then you found these other bands, and I think that was like a very like 90s thing. You find a band you like, and then you look at what else is on that label, and then you
Yes.
kind of expand out that way. Um, did Nitro end up being kind of your record label that you were most kind of following, or was it Asian Man when you got connected into that,
I kind of,
or Choice C?
well, yeah, I kind of got into a lot of them. I didn't really have necessarily like a favorite at that time. I was listening to a lot of bands that were on Nitro, a lot of bands that were on Fat, a lot of bands that were on Lookout, a lot of bands that were on Asian Man, like all kind of the like active, really active punk labels at the time. I wasn't like, I was a young teenager, so I wasn't
Sure.
like super plugged into like, SST or BYO or anything like that. I was more kind of aware of sort of like the things that were emerging around third wave and kind of like the skate punkish scene kind of around that time, basically. But
Sure.
I was into all of it, honestly. Yeah, I liked it all. I loved that Nitro comp for sure. The first Nitro comp, I was really into that one.
Right on. I think it's interesting. Whenever I have these conversations with people, especially people from California, y'all's scene was so much bigger than like ours and like DFW. Like we had bands, but mostly we were following labels from other
Mm.
places. And um, so I don't know. It's just interesting to kind of hear that differentiation. So you find Bad Time Records. No, not Bad Man. I'm a mess right here. You find Asian Man Records, and and you connect in with that. Shinobu ends up doing stuff with Asian Man Records. Uh, where do we go from here? Because first of all, I know Shinobu's not your only band. There was several bands since then. Tell me a little bit about that progress and as a musician and where that goes.
Sure, yeah. Well, yeah, Shinobu was pretty active for a while, but we were, all young people who were either in college or starting first kind of careers, sort of, and so it was often like we were only able to tour so often, and it was a band that I think had. I'm very proud of a lot of what we did, but I think it was a minor audience that we reached. We weren't like huge, and we still aren't, but I've been told since that we've influenced other musicians, and I think that ended up being kind of the thing. We were getting plugged into the world of DIY and the underground, and being active in it, and unbeknownst to me, kind of inspiring some other people to do the same around the time. But so at a point, when you're a band that's not making money in San Jose, people start making a choice about what they're going to do with their life. And basically, three-fourths of the band moved out of San Jose, as is often the choice from San Jose. People from San Jose end up making. Basically, they're like, I can't live here because it's too expensive and I can't work as a musician, and it just so they moved somewhere else, and that happened to three-fourths of Shinobu. Um, Shinobu was sharing a practice space with another band called Pterodon, that were more of like a indie rock kind of post-punkish punk band, three-piece. Really good friends of ours that we played a ton of shows with. Um, and at the same time that three-fourths of Shinobu moved out of San Jose, their guitarist, Pterodon's guitarist, decided he didn't really want to play music that much anymore. He had a good job he was going to commit to. So that left just three of us in the practice space, basically. Me and Max and Morgan from Pterodon. And so I think I was like, can I please play in a band with you guys? And then so we started Hard Girls at that point. And that was the three of us. And Hard Girls had a little bit more connectivity than Shinobu did, either because there was already some groundwork laid, or because the scene was starting to change. There's a new generation of listeners. There's all sorts of elements going on, but Hard Girls did a little bit better. And Mike Park was a really big fan of Hard Girls. He was really supportive of us, and he offered to put out a record right away. And he was like, "I can see this working." And he was really a champion of the band, which I really appreciated. And that band did a bunch, but it also was hitting the same issue that Shinobu was, which is just that, like, unless you're really, really successful, it's almost impossible to live in San Jose as a band, like, or unless you have some kind of lucky situation. And I have rent control where I live, so I am in the latter category, where I'm very lucky that I can, and I am also lucky that the band I've been in since Hard Girls has also been successful. But anyway, so I've been able to stay. But so Hard Girls ran into the same issue that Shinobu did, basically. And two of the three members ended up moving away out of San Jose. And before that, Jeff had asked me to play in a band with him. We had done some projects together already, and we had been friends together. We've been friends for a long time. Shinobu and Bob in the music industry were like East Coast, West Coast buddies. We would always play shows on each other's coast together, and we did a tour together. We did a tour where it was Shinobu and Bomb, but half of Shinobu lived in Japan at the time, so Jeff and John played in Shinobu as well, which was really fun. But so we had we were pretty thick as friends already. And Mike Park asked us to do a Bruce Lee Band record, which we did. And we met Kevin Higuchi at that point on that record, and the drummer. And Jeff was thinking about doing solo music at that point. So he was like, "Would you play guitar with me if I started a solo thing?" And I was like, "Of course, definitely." And then we played with Kevin, and Kevin was amazing. And Jeff was like, "We should play with Kevin. Kevin should be the drummer." And he already had John, and so that ended up being the Jeff Rosenstock Band, the beginning of that. He had done the record I Look Like Shit, but hadn't done any like full lengths. I think that's like maybe 6 songs, 7 songs, something like that. And 2 of them are covers, maybe. And then, but we were the band for like the first Jeff Rosenstock record, and been consistently the band since. With the one exception that partway in we added in another Asian Man alumni, or alumnus, Dan Pothast from MU330. And he plays keys and a lot of instruments in the Jeff Band. But that's kind of been my musical path. And then in there, I started making solo music too, because I kept having this thing where all my bandmates were leaving. And so I was like, oh, I guess in San Jose, it's basically just me and my guitar. So I'll make music that's just my guitar. And my solo music is just every sound is just guitar, basically. And so it's kind of me making a band of the guitar, since I keep losing my bandmates.
Well, it's a pretty remarkable like history of music, connected to a number of phenomenal bands, and like you said, even bands maybe that not everyone knows, but had impact on other bands that people may even know better. I have a question that you made me think of when you were talking about the difficulty of existing as a band in San Jose, and I'm wondering if it's one way or the other or both. Is the issue simply the cost of living in San Jose? Is it the competitive music field in California? Or is it kind of both?
There's a couple of things happening. One is that it is prohibitively expensive and has ramped up in a way that has been very accelerated and not natural, and has kind of like changed in a short period of time, basically, and has basically just like put up a wall that is unclimbable for anybody who isn't a millionaire, basically. And then to your second point, more specifically in San Jose, we're very close to both San Francisco and Oakland, which have much more established touring circuits. And so touring acts tend to come through those cities rather than San Jose. San Jose is close enough that it falls under what's called a radius clause for a lot of venues in San Francisco and Oakland, meaning you can't play any other place within this radius, basically, like nothing
Mm.
within 20 miles or something like that. And a
Yeah.
20-mile radius from uh, would probably include San Francisco and would include San Jose, is what I mean to say. And So that really limits people coming through on touring circuits, which makes it harder for local bands to connect to touring bands. And then a third issue is that because of the high price of living, there's been a difficulty with permanently established venues here, and so that has also made connecting to the touring circuit difficult for bands, and it just means that you can't make enough money working as a musician locally. You have to tour if you're going to do it.
Yeah.
And you have to tour somewhat regularly, and you have to hopefully be successful on those tours. And So it adds up to a lot of challenges. But it has resulted in a really strong DIY scene because there are so few options that are established places that work for the punk and underground world. Basically, it's resulted in a really passionate and connected DIY scene out of necessity, I would say.
Well, that's awesome. One more just question that you've got me kind of thinking about the touring thing, and then we'll keep moving forward. But I know that when I talk to people about touring in Texas, one of the things I hear the most is it's just too darn big. And so most people will kind of follow Highway 35. And if you go down 35, you hit Dallas, Fort Worth, you hit maybe San Antonio, Austin. You could shoot over and do Houston, and then that's it, which is a lot of big cities, but you're also missing like 2/3 of the state that goes, west. California, obviously, different issue, not as wide as we are, but a very long state. Is that an additional challenge with like touring in California?
Definitely, and you're kind of getting at something that makes it with both of these states makes being a band from California significantly different than being a band from, say, New York or Philadelphia. On the East Coast, there's a lot of big cities very close to each other and with very distinct identities and distinct scenes that are remarkably like an hour and a half or 2 hours away from each other. You've got like New York, Boston, Philly, DC, Baltimore, all just right there, basically. And then that's not even counting Pittsburgh and everything else. There's so many places just right there.
Yeah.
In California, you have the Bay Area. And in the Bay Area, you're often playing one Bay Area show because of the radius clause mentioned and splitting the audience of the entire Bay Area between a bunch of shows. So people usually are like, all right, I'll do a San Francisco one as my Bay show, or I'll do an Oakland show as my Bay show.
Yeah.
And then the next option is either you play Sacramento or you drive all the way to Portland, which is a long way away. And then from there you get to Seattle, which is the next one. And then where do you go? It's like, where do you go from there? Then you drive for a long time and you probably go to Boise, and then you still have to drive for a long time to go somewhere else. And then if you're like for the Bay Area, if you go south, then you've got Bay Area, your one Bay Area show, and then a 6-hour drive to LA for your next thing. Long ways. And that's really the only other place. Like you could do San Diego too, another 2 hours south of LA. And then you're looking at driving to Phoenix, which is many hours into the desert. And then from Phoenix, where do you go? It's like you go maybe into New Mexico. A lot of tours skip New Mexico. Maybe you start getting into Texas. And as you're describing, there's a lot of West Texas to go through before you get to any of the cities you've mentioned.
Yeah.
And so touring as a band on the West Coast immediately you're hit with many very long drives,
Yeah.
and it just is a different challenge than bands on the East Coast have, frankly, and even in the Midwest, because the Midwest is funnels to the East Coast fairly naturally, and there's many other cities up and down the Midwest that connect to each other fairly easily.
And I've got to be honest, like living in California, I could see very much like looking at the temperatures in Phoenix and Texas and being like, nah, we'll just go to the beach and get a second job, I guess.
There's been some real rough nights in Phoenix. Some real rough temperature number, like you just numbers you don't ever want to see on a thermostat. You
Yeah.
know, like definitely seen some numbers on there where I was like, what? It should not get that high.
I've got a friend of mine that we were talking one time, and I was complaining about Texas heat, and I was like, oh, it's like 112 for the next 6 days, and she was like, yeah, man, that's awful. And I said, what's the temperature where you're at? And I forgot she was in Phoenix, and she's like, it's 125. And I was like, oh my God. And she was like, but it's a dry heat. And I'm like, I'm sorry, at some point it doesn't matter, it's just too hot.
It's yeah. In Phoenix, you're basically going from like an air conditioned room quickly to an air conditioned car, staying in that as long as possible and as close as possible to the next air conditioned room. Basically, it's a necessity, really.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about what brought this project about, the book. Let's get into talking about the book a little bit. I can say that like a few years ago, we kind of were in the ska scene, were sort of blessed with three great ska books almost all at once, right? We got In Defense of Ska, we got Ska Boom, and we got Hell of a Hat, all three really great ska books that kind of look at the ska scene from three different angles. And for a scene that to many people appeared dead for a long time, that was an exciting thing. We had Pick It Up, the documentary as well. But then you worry, like, okay, are we ever going to get another book that is for us, ska scene kids? And I think what's exciting about this book, first of all, I think it would be a misnomer to just think of Asian Man Records as strictly a ska label, because obviously they do a lot of other stuff. But it is nice to have this book that kind of feels like it's ours. So how did you get to it?
Well, yeah. In addition to being a musician, I was always really inspired by writing and by fiction in particular. And I spent a long time really unsuccessfully trying to write fiction. Kind of butting my head up against the wall, trying to do something that I think I hadn't really understood how to work within yet, basically. And at a point, I was like, I can either keep trying to unsuccessfully publish fiction, or I can just try and find how to get something published anywhere. And I started at that point looking more at writing articles and writing things where there is a reason to be reading what's in there, and thinking more about like not just writing some fiction story that maybe nobody's ever going to read, because you need a reason to want to sit down with a fiction story to begin with. But writing about something that served a purpose, basically. And so I started thinking more and more about my own scene and the difficulties of the scene, and all the musicians who have put in work here, some of whom have struggled and never really been documented, despite what they've put in. And so then at that point, I started pitching ideas to the local alt weekly in San Jose, the alt weekly paper. And it was kind of like, it was a huge learning process, honestly, because I was coming at it with this ridiculous idea of being like a fiction writer, just like coming up with ideas and stuff, basically. But then I realized at a point that like the magazine has like a form and they need particular things. It's like, we need a music story this week. And so I started writing more music stories, covering more local artists, and thinking more and more about the music that was occurring here and um, really being concerned about making sure it got documented, because there's so much documentation of music in New York and so much documentation of music in LA, and um, so many even in San Francisco, but there's so little of a lot of the bands in San Jose. And it was important to me that it was getting actually captured in some way, that somebody was saying this band was making this music here at this time, so that future generations would know, if nothing else, so if someone was researching what was going on here and Googling or whatever they use in the future, because Google barely works now, um, uh, searching San Jose music 2012 or whatever, maybe they would come upon something I had written about a band that was active during that time. Um, so anyway, I was doing that for a while, and then I eventually got hired as the arts editor at that paper. And so at that point, I was editing the most of the weekly paper every week, um, and still writing, but assigning a lot of pieces, but basically looking at everything that was happening in San Jose every week and trying to determine what to talk about in music, what to talk about in art, if there was going to be a film piece, if there was a comedy story or a poetry story, or what it was going to be, if there's a book that a local author had written. And so I was just really focused on this area and the stories and the people making things in this area. And in that process, really, there was a moment where I realized that Asian Man was going to turn 30 soon. I was like, it's 2022 now, which means in 4 years, Asian Man will be 30 years old, which is a huge milestone, especially for a small label run by one person that has done as much as Asian Man has done. Um, and so at that point, I realized that, like, someone, if nobody was writing it, someone had to soon, because 4 years is going to fly by when you're working on something about 30 years. So I asked Mike if anyone was, and he said nobody had approached him about anything like that. And so I was thinking about it more and more, and I was like, what do you think if I wrote a book about Asian Man? For the 30, about 30 years of the label. The label's turning 30. It's a big thing. It's about to put out 400 releases. That was the number that was looming at the time. And so he was like, yeah, let's do it. Go for it. Immediately supportive. And so I just kind of started treating it as though it was happening. And I was like, okay, let's say this book is real. And I started interviewing him and we would go on these long walks where I would just record our conversation, and I would talk to him for like 2 hours. And then I would come home and I would listen to it and I would transcribe it, and then I would make notes about who else to talk to based on that conversation and start talking to those people. And basically I wrote a book proposal and a sample chapter. And those are what got accepted. I sent those to Clash Books, and I sent the proposal and a sample chapter, and it got accepted on that, which I was very thankful for. Um, uh, Before I let you ask another question, sorry to dominate here, but
No, you're doing great. I'm
okay, thank
loving
you.
it. Sorry, I came up with it.
Cool. I just want to note that, like, in the process of doing the book proposal and figuring out how, if I can do this project, and how, both Aaron Carnes and Dan Ozzie were really supportive and helpful. Aaron Aaron had been an editor of mine at the weekly paper, and Aaron was an old friend. And Aaron started kind of writing music journalism right around the time I was trying to figure out how to publish fiction and stuff. And so he's been a longtime writing friend. And you know, I he had told me he was thinking about writing a book about Skank and Pickle. And so at a point I was like, I had to ask him. I was like, "What? I don't want to take anything from you. I don't want to like take a project out from under you that you're working on. I was thinking about writing a book about Asian Man. What do you think about that?" And he was really, oh shoot, sorry, I bumped the computer.
Mhm.
He was really supportive of the idea, and I really appreciated that. Rather than being kind of like possessive or um, I think there's a myth of a lot of writers being like looking for some idea to steal from somebody kind of thing, and like
Yeah.
rather than that, he was like, "You should do it. It's a great idea." And I think he was kind of moving away from the idea of doing a Skank and Pickle book anyway by that point. But he was really supportive, and Dan Ozzie was really willing to share some information with me about how to write a book proposal, which is something of like an occult practice. Practically, I feel like there's so little information about it.
Yeah.
Um, so that was helpful too. And without them, I don't know if it would exist now.
Well, I love hearing all of that, and I've got to, if I'm being honest, like I myself have had some ideas of things that I'd like to write, and maybe gems of a book one day. So it's interesting to hear you kind of talk about that process. One of the questions that kind of was stirring in my mind as you were talking about it, and you've talked a lot about so many people being just kind and supportive, throughout the years and throughout the processes, and I love that. Did you find it at all daunting to be writing a book about someone that you considered a friend? Did you ever worry that, like, they might take offense if you portrayed them in a certain way, and that could be something damaging?
It's always a concern, really, because like when you're writing nonfiction, when you're writing music journalism or anything like that, it's like this is people's lives, and like it's a lot of responsibility, and I think it is something that like there were some nights where I was like, oh my God, like bolt awake in the middle of the night, like what the fuck am I doing? Like I have to make sure that I'm not doing anything wrong. And by the way, sorry if I'm swearing on the program and I
No,
shouldn't.
you're good. You're good.
Okay, cool. Just double checking. But it was a big thing. It felt I felt a lot of responsibility, and in no small way because also this is a very real. There's a lot of very real political and kind of political implications of Asian Man and Mike's work over the years, and also just Mike being willing to be himself in the scene where there isn't a lot of representation.
Yeah.
And so I felt a lot of responsibility to do it well, to do it justice, and to hopefully not take away from it and make it into something about me, That was a really big concern for me writing it too, is I was like, okay, I've done albums on this label that I should probably talk about because they were released by this label, but I'm not trying to make myself the focus here.
Right.
So it became like a when necessary kind of thing to mention, basically. But to answer your question, yes.
Well, and I love, early on in the book, you definitely spend some time talking about some of that history, some of your history with the label, your bands, and that kind of stuff. But this is not, you could have written like a 150-page book and it been like just like a, cursory glance, a summary kind of view. But this is a 330-page book, roughly. So you go in depth in a lot of ways. What were the things that you were like, I have to talk about this? And then what were some of the things that you were like, yeah, I would love to talk about this, but I'm going to have to leave it on the editing floor because I don't want it to be a 700-page book?
Exactly. That was really the concern. At the end of the day, I'm a reader and I love reading, and I love reading a book that feels compelling, that you want to reach the end of. And it was a concern to me that this book be like that and not be like something that you're so intimidated by its size that you just don't even want to start reading, or something that felt like it was it missed the point or was like not really capturing what was going on, because 30 years of history is a lot, and
Yeah.
from my perspective, a lot has really changed in the industry over the last 30 years, and I think a lot of the music that we think of as even mainstream music now has been influenced and affected by the music that has come out of this label. And So it was important to me that it was compelling and that it was somewhat comprehensive, but that it was not like completist just to be completist kind of thing. I think that that can kind of get in the way of narrative, frankly. That was the thing. Like there was things like where I was like, okay, these have to be in there. Like Alkaline Trio has to be in there. Less Than Jake has to be in there. Link 80 has to be in there. Mike's own music has to be in there. Like those are
Yeah.
kind of early ones for me. I was like, these ones are definitely yes. They're like sort of crucial moments for the label. Mike's desire to start a label in Japan, which then formed a connection for maybe close to 100 albums, frankly, on Asian Man. Uh, that was something where I was like, that's got to be in there. Um, and the hard part, really, as far as like what to cut, was just that like again, you want it to be a compelling narrative and not feel like bogged down by just details constantly or like information, really. There were things that I had to collapse a little bit, and like all the kind of like third wave as a broad genre gets kind of collapsed a little bit in the Misfits of Ska 2 chapter, which really focuses on Blue Meanies, MU330, and Slow Gherkin as sort of misfits of ska, bands that could have reached a wider audience, especially in the case of Blue Meanies, who actually got on a major label at the time when ska bands were getting on major labels. But didn't exactly cross over in the way that, say, Less Than Jake or Real Big Fish or Mighty Mighty Boss Tones did. So in my mind, it made more sense to focus closely on three bands that were representative of a larger thing
Sure.
than spend 10 pages on Unsteady and 10 pages on Monkey and 10 pages on just going down the list, Five Iron Frenzy, and then 10 pages on Big D, and then 10 pages on, and then just like, because then the narrative would be more like just herky jerky and just kind of like
Yeah.
constant switching up. And it felt more important to me to kind of like focus in tightly, basically. A similar kind of thing happened around there's a chapter called Get Warmer that's about kind of DIY punk in the 2010s. And it focuses on AJJ and Bomb the Music Industry and Lemuria. Um, Theoretically, we could have also had more on sort of fourth wave emo, what's called fourth wave emo, around that time too. Dousing and Warm Thoughts and even Joyce Manor. Joyce Manor is included in this chapter, but they're sort of that's what I mean is the fourth wave emo movement gets sort of gestured to because of Joyce Manor being in there, but I wasn't able to talk about, say, Warm Thoughts at length or Dousing at length, even though they're absolutely still part of the whole conversation. And so I try to mention everybody as much as I can. I try to mention as many things as I possibly can and make sure that even if I'm not talking about Monkey at length, for example, that Monkey gets mentioned a few times for sure, and especially when it's relevant, to not leave them out as part of this whole conversation. Same thing with like bands like Pushover or trying to think of other ones that are not the average listeners on the average listener's radar, like Polysix or Akiakane, bands that like Mike released that maybe not everybody knows. It's important still to mention them contextually at the right time, I think.
Now, to what extent would you say like this book is a book about Mike Park versus a book about Asian Man Records? And I know there's a level of like Asian Man Records is Mike Park, but how do you balance that out?
Yeah, I do think it is more about Asian Man Records than it is about Mike Park. But I do think that the only way to understand Asian Man Records is to understand Mike Park. And I think that what I'm trying to do is create an understanding that this thing that is this label is the work of many hundreds of people. And Mike is at the center of it. And Mike is the reason it is all happening and the reason it is reaching everybody. But at the end of the day, this is hundreds of musicians' lives. And they are all brought together because of Mike. And so Mike is important um, both as a kind of nexus in a way that brings all these people together, but then also just absolutely as a person himself and his role in the whole thing, as well as his role again in kind of the political understanding of America these days, from the '90s to now. I think his influence is really powerful in the underground.
Yeah, it's interesting. Just so people who pay attention to my channel have heard this before, so it's probably boring for them. But for me, I didn't really grow up in the third wave ska scene. I grew up in the Christian rock scene, and my encounter with ska was primarily through that, which was not a whole lot of bands. There was about 3 really important bands.
Five
Iron
Iron?
Frenzy was, Five Iron was one of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Supertones and the Insiders, we considered them our big 3. And then there were some lesser ones that were still great, and then some lesser ones that were really not great. But when I did sort of start diving back into the third wave ska scene, which was not long before I started this podcast, I had a lot of people I kind of asked people, hey, what should I listen to? And it was really interesting, those early episodes of the podcast, so many people were like, we became a band, or we did this because of, you would hear Fishbone a lot, but you would also hear Skanking Pickle a lot, and I think that Skanking Pickle might be a surprise for a lot of people that are not deeper into the scene, because Fishbone is a band that, Questlove shouts out all the time, so, but you heard Skanking Pickle with almost the same level of regularity. And for me also, what little knowledge I had of Asian Man and Mike Park from my little town in Texas was seeing the Ska Against Racism tour come through. And that sort of happened, and I think I've talked about this before on the podcast too, but that happened the same summer that a man was dragged to death behind a truck in Jasper, Texas. A black man was dragged to death behind a truck in Jasper, Texas. And I had grown up in a moderately diverse town, not super diverse, but I was very much a young kind of white man who was racism was a thing that happened in the 60s and then it got fixed. And then hearing the Ska Against Racism tour, I was like, yeah, racism is bad, but is it still a thing? And then that happened, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad that there are people out there fighting against this nonsense. And I may or may not have placed a few stickers of people throwing the Nazi symbol in the trash can, Ska Against Racism stickers and stuff around my high school campus in those years. So it's kind of interesting to see the way the threads, and you're talking about Mike Park's impact, seeing how that's kind of woven through so much of the ska scene and even someone's life who was not necessarily a part of the ska scene at that time. I may not have known about that tour if Five Iron wasn't on it, but I still knew about it.
Well, I think what you're talking about is something that's very real, which is that, by titling it Ska Against Racism, Mike was really actively trying to do exactly what you're describing. I think you were not alone in your position in the 90s of being a young person presented with things on television and thinking, oh, racism is over. That's a thing from before. But in reality, it's always there, and it's always been there, and it's a position of privilege, lucky privilege, to not be able to see it. And I had felt that way when I was younger as well, because I grew up in a suburb, and so it's the kind of thing that you get a little bit shielded from.
Yeah.
And Yes, I think like it was a very conscious choice of Mike to center that it is a current issue, not something from the past, but that is happening. And I think it's really powerful what you're describing to have that have something in reality kind of reveal that reality to you, really. Um, there was another person that I spoke to for the book who had a similar experience where she said that she had heard "Don't Sit Next to Me Just Because I'm Asian," the Chinky song, or no, Bruce Lee band song, excuse me, and was like, "Wow, this is a really powerful song. I'd never even really thought about this before." And then she said she saw the sticker you're describing, the "Keep Your Country Nice and Clean" sticker, where someone's throwing a swastika in a trash can. And she said seeing it made her understand that it was a current problem and not a problem from some black and white movie, but something that still exists and will exist worse if we do not actively come together to oppose it.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't want to. I mean, I could ask you about another 100 questions, but I do want to kind of start coming to a conclusion. I will say, in preparation for this, you sent me a copy of the book. I wish I had had more time to really dive deep because what I've read so much, I'm really, really enjoying it. So I ordered
Thank you.
myself a copy, and I ordered my copy from Asian Man Records. So
Amazing.
anyone who's listening to this, I want to encourage you to order. I mean, you might as well order from Asian Man Records, right? The book about Asian Man Records. And one thing that I think Mike is also known for is insane how fast he gets orders out, considering he's working by himself in there. I ordered it yesterday. It shipped yesterday, and so
Yes.
so it's on its way. And if you order from him, he autographs it, even though he didn't write it, but because it's about him and his label. Kind of a nice added bonus there.
He's doing it. I mean, I'm ultimately, I just really hope, and I think that it has been the case, that he's happy with it because I want this, well, I want it to be something that's good for everybody, frankly, but also it's probably got to be weird to be the subject of a book. I hope he likes it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think one thing, like us in the 90s, one of the things we talk about a lot is, yesterday was my birthday that we're recording this May 13th. My birthday was May 12th. I turned 44 years old. And we laugh a lot, and I'm an educator. I'm a school librarian. I've been a teacher. About the fact that, like, in our generation, when we did stupid things, it was not caught on cell phone footage and then shared everywhere immediately. So there's this aspect of growing up in the 90s and being like, I'm safe. Nobody has to know. But when there's a book out about you, you're like, oh, let's see what got passed down there. So it could
Yeah.
be a scary thing.
Definitely. And I tried to be respectful and I really don't want to make anybody into a villain or anything like that or have
Sure.
it be like exploitative, like
Yeah.
tabloidy, like I'm just trying to talk about really to me the some of the texture of life in music over these last 30 years.
Yeah.
It's something that I think like there's a lot of writing and movies and things like that about music that makes it seem like you're the only thing is to be a rock star or to be like a pop star, or basically being like at the top of some chart, basically. But so much of music is more about doing something because you have something in you that you want to release and you want to put out into the world, and you're doing it with your community and in your
Yeah.
community. And I think that that is what I'm trying to recenter a little bit with this book, if I can. In some ways, I think of Asian Man really as a counter narrative to the narratives of the music industry.
Mhm.
Mike chose to say no to a lot of the things that music industry are just kind of givens, things that you would, of course, do, like have a PR person,
Right.
or maybe recommend that bands have managers, or things like that that Mike will does not do. And I think that the success of Asian Man over 30 years and the fact that it continues to release interesting music well into its 400th catalog number is a testament to this counter narrative, really.
So I know that I have a few favorites from Asian Man Records, and I quickly could shout out some vinyl albums I've ordered from the Bruce Lee Band, from MU330, from Hay Smith. What would be maybe a handful of albums that you are that are staples for you that came from Asian Man Records?
Yeah, there's so many good ones. You got to, of course, say "Goddamn It" by Alkaline Trio. That one is it's an incredible record. Honestly, it sounds so good. The performances are so good. The melodies are so big. It's incredible. Shed Some Skin by Slow Gherkin, I think, is huge. Just a really amazing record. One of the great third wave records, I think. Um, I am a big fan of E. I think E is a really underrated band on Asian Man, indie rock band from San Francisco in the 2000s. Tobin Mori from Korea Girl, it was his band after Korea Girl. Both their records, Ramadan and For 100 We Try Harder, both are really good indie rock records on Asian Man. Um, there's Get Warmer, Bomb the Music Industry's Get Warmer is a really huge, powerful, cool record, you know? Really great. That's a great one. And yeah, it gets hard because now I could just be like, and this, and this, and this, and yeah,
Yeah.
AJJ's People Who Can Eat People is incredible. One that gets really forgotten sometimes, maybe you like as a ska fan, is the what are they called? Johnny Sacco's Full Trucker Effect. Are you familiar with that record?
I don't know the album very well, but I do know Johnny Sacco, and I know how beloved they are.
Yeah, yeah, the musicianship is really high in the band, and it's they're a really good band, and like kind of a band's band a little bit. But
Yeah.
then that record is it's like a concept album where it's the soundtrack to a 70s trucker movie, a made up trucker movie. So all the songs are like the theme song for this trucking company in the movie, or and then there's like skits that are like scenes from the movie and stuff like that. But it's a very inspired, weird, just kind of like one-off idea basically. That's really cool. A cool one.
I love that, man. So one of the questions I always like to ask, and I feel like this is a good kind of last question to ask, but because I am the Rudie Librarian, I'm a school librarian. I'm a public librarian as well. And before that, I was an English teacher. I always and the whole channel started to help people love reading, but it also has very much entailed the music scene. What are a couple of books that are some of your favorite books? And they don't have to be music books; they can be. But what are some of your favorite books to go to?
Yeah, God, there's so many. But really, the book that, and I mentioned this in an interview I did with Dan Ozzie recently, but the book that I think really changed the way I think about writing was The Savage Detectives by Roberto Bolaño.
Okay.
When I read that, it, I kind of understood a lot of things differently after having read it. And one of the things that was really important to me after reading it was I've very rarely read a book that has so much life in it and that feels so alive and like these like the things that happen to you in your life matter, even if they are no one sees them, or if they are small. Um, it's a fascinating book, but that was huge for me as a writer, and in some ways, I think of it a little bit in this book because this is a book about a lot of people. Savage Detectives is about a lot of people, and more about a movement than it is about like a protagonist kind of. And in a way, this is also more about a movement than it is about a protagonist. Though Mike Park is certainly in the center of a lot of it for sure. So I love that one. I really love that book. Uh, I'm a fan of a lot of Latin American authors and like European authors. I was a lit major in undergrad, and like I was really into. As a kid, I loved Kafka. I was a weird kid who loved Kafka, and I got really into like modernism for a long time, and late 19th century, early 20th century stuff. And then more recently, I've been trying to read contemporary authors more to be kind of like in today, in a way, to be connected to what's happening to today and what's going on in writing today. An author that's alive right now who I really like is Gunhild Oyahag. She is, I think, maybe from Norway. I forget where exactly, but her writing is so fresh feeling and like similar, where it really captures that like small things in life matter, which I think sometimes gets lost. I think sometimes you read a book and it's like it's all about like what's the big idea or what's the problem or whatever. But like sometimes when you read a book that really like you're compelled to find out what's going on, and it's just about like someone driving down the street, you know, or something, and just because the writing is so fresh.
Yeah.
She's one. I really like Dennis Johnson too. He's someone who I kind of discovered more recently, and people always talk about Jesus' Son, which is a pretty amazing book, honestly. But he also wrote this book called Fiscadoro that is about like a post-apocalyptic Floridian town where there's a new language that everyone's speaking, and there's this scene in it where someone is like I forget if there's a plane crash or something, but somebody is like lost out in the ocean, and it lasts like 120 pages of this person just floating in the ocean, but it's like completely engrossing. You're like, what is going to happen? What is going to happen? And like, anyway, yeah. So he's another one. You know, I think books that can surprise you and make you uh, uh, see your own life in new ways. Really, those are really important to me. And all of those books that I've mentioned have done that a little bit.
I love that, man. It's a great list, and I think that that's a list that I would not expect any other guest to replicate. So that makes it fun
Thank you.
too, because then people can dive into something maybe they haven't heard of or whatever. So that's wonderful, man. Um, Before you go, can you talk a little bit about where people can kind of find you and keep up with you, and then just a little bit about the release of the book, which I think by the time this comes out, we're going to be close.
Sure, yeah. Well, so you can find me online. I'm Mike Huguenor. I'm on Instagram as Mike Huguenor. I'm on Blue Sky as Mike Huguenor. And I guess I'm kind of on Facebook, but I don't really use it that much. Sorry, but if you pop in there, I might pop in here and there. But otherwise, the book itself is sold through Clash Books, but you can also order it from your favorite local independent bookstore. That's what I would recommend people do. That way, they're supporting the business that supports literature in their community. And thankfully, Clash has good distribution, so it should be in most of them. And if it isn't yet, they can order it through the distributor. And then it's a win for everybody.
Yeah.
But then you can also get it through like bookshop.org and Amazon and all of those. And
And Asian Man Records.
and Asian Man Records itself. That's right. Yeah, exactly. Mail order is still fun.
Yeah, and but if you order from Asian Man Records, let's just go ahead and say make sure that you're nice. because you don't want to end up in one of the emails or one of the videos where Mike is talking about people who are not nice, because there are some people that are very rude.
It's true. And, this is a business of one guy. Maybe there's a volunteer with him, and he's sending out hundreds of things all the time. There's gotta be one thing that slips through the cracks sometimes, like have some empathy. But I do enjoy seeing him put them on blast. It's pretty funny.
I do too. And a lot of times when he does it, I'm just like, oh my God. Like a lot of times it starts out relatively nice. It's like, hey, I just didn't get this. And you're like, oh, this is going to be sweet. And then at some point they're just like, what is wrong with you? Why are you horrible at everything in your life? And you're like, what?
People spiral quick sometimes. It's a little wild.
All right. Well, it has been a real pleasure. And thanks so much. I can't wait to read the whole book. Right now, we're at the end of the school year. It's a crazy, crazy time. And my school is actually moving into a new building. So we're packing up the whole school. So this is probably going to be my first read of the summer. And I can't wait to dive in.
Oh, cool. Thank you so much. And good luck on the move. And, frankly, thank you for what you're doing as a teacher. I think it's an important thing. And I think that teachers in America are undervalued. So thank you.
Appreciate that.